Mayor and council members, you are now live on YouTube and the time is 7 o'clock.
Okay, thank you. Welcome everyone to tonight's virtual workshop meeting of the Livermore City Council at 7 p.m. Monday, October 18th, 2021. The meeting participation information can be found at the end of the agenda. And at this point, calling the meeting to order, and can we have a roll call?
Councilmember Bonanno.
Here.
Councilmember Carling.
Here.
Councilmember Kick. Here. Vice Mayor Monroe. Vice
Did
Mayor
you hear me?
Monroe.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Oh, good. Okay. I'm here.
Okay. Mayor Warner.
Here. All right, thank you. We're all present. So this is an opportunity for the public to address the City Council regarding the special meeting item. And that it can only be on that item, which is our training on the online mapping tools and map submission for the 2021 redistricting process is for the City Council and resident training. Do we have anyone who wishes to address us at this point?
Mayor, would you like me to go over the process for this evening?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
Thank you. When participating in this portion of tonight's meeting, one comment may be given per person regarding only the special workshop item. Members of the public can participate by using the raise hand feature or *9 if calling in when the item begins. Please do not wait until the public comment period opens to raise your hand. Instead, raise your hand now. Once public comment opens, each participant's name will be announced and their 3 minutes will begin upon being unmuted. The mayor will announce the conclusion of the public comment period after comments have been voiced into the record. After the mayor introduces the item, the city's consultants will provide a presentation regarding redistricting and how residents can use a variety of tools to submit maps in the city. The city council will view the training with cameras off to encourage residents to participate directly with the city's consultants. During the presentation, there may be additional opportunities for attendees to provide input to the consultants. Please use the raise hand feature or *9 when calling in to participate. Each participant's name will be announced upon being unmuted and no timer will be used. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Just to summarize that, there are two opportunities. One is right now before the training starts, and then people can participate during the training. Correct?
That is correct, Mayor.
Okay, so with respect to this first opportunity, is there anybody who wishes to address us before we get started?
Mayor, no comments have been received.
Okay, so I'll close the public comment on the workshop item itself, and we'll now proceed to the training.
Honorable Mayor, this is Mark Roberts, your city manager, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce Michael Wagaman with Wagaman Strategies, as well as Jennifer Nitwig with Trupepi Smith, who will be providing the presentation. I'll turn it over to them. I believe Jennifer's going to start us off this evening. Jennifer?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, City Manager Roberts, and good evening, City of Livermore. So welcome everyone to the City of Livermore's community workshop on redistricting, and we're so glad that you've joined us here tonight. So if I could have my colleague open up our slides. There we are. Okay, so next slide, please. Perfect. So please know that this meeting is being recorded this evening, and a video recording of the meeting will be posted to the city's redistricting website for anyone who might not be able to join us this evening. And we'll be sharing more about the website in the following slides. So next slide, please. Before we really get into our training and the workshop portion, I do just want to cover a few logistics. So we'll go over the technology here before we begin so we can help make sure everyone is comfortable with the different features. Since this workshop began as part of a special meeting of the City Council, hopefully many of you are familiar with this setup and a little bit of how you would engage. But as was mentioned a little bit, what's different about tonight is that we'll have several sections of this workshop that are more informal opportunities for some back and forth, for some dialogue, and some unstructured feedback where we can answer your questions and gather that community input. So at those times, if you do have a question or comment, please click the raise hand button on Zoom and we'll call on you to speak. And if you are participating via dial-in, you can raise your hand by dialing *9. And then once we've called upon you to speak, we'll also unmute you at that time so you can ask your question and share your feedback. So next slide. Now that we've covered some of the logistics, I do want to share more of an introduction. So my name is Jen Nentwig. I'm a director with Trippepi Smith. I'm your facilitator here tonight and also part of the team assisting Livermore with outreach about this important issue. Also from Trippepi Smith, I have Gerald supporting us on the back end tonight, helping facilitate the workshop and manage the Zoom line. And here with us tonight, we also have Mr. Michael Wagaman of Wagaman Strategies, the demographer working with the City of Livermore. And so, Mr. Wagaman, I'll turn it over to you to say hi and share a bit more about yourself.
Hello, everyone, and I'm glad to join all of you this evening. For those of you who know, I was also the demographer who worked with the city a few years ago when it switched over to district elections, and I'm happy to be back to help you through the now redistricting process.
Perfect. Thanks so much. All right. And as we get ready to jump into the informational part of the evening, I'll review a rough schedule of what we'll be covering here tonight. So we'll start by covering the process, rules, and goals of redistricting. For folks who were able to listen into the first hearing last week, it'll be a little bit of a recap of some of that material. And then we'll delve into a discussion of neighborhoods and communities of interest. So this is one of the sections where we'll look for some community input. And then we'll introduce the public tools for drawing and reviewing maps, where Mr. Wagaman will actually be able to pull those up and do a little bit of a walkthrough. And then lastly, we'll wrap up by talking about next steps in the process. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about the goals of this evening. So first and foremost, we're going to start off with a chance to learn from the experts. And tonight that is Mr. Wagaman from Wagaman Strategies. And redistricting is a complex process. So as a result, it's really an opportunity to educate and explain to the public what this process is and why it's so important. Then once we've shared information on how the process works, it's important for the experts to hear from you. So the community members will be the stars of the show as this process moves forward. It's important for the experts to hear from you because you are the experts in your community. And effective redistricting relies upon identifying neighborhoods and communities of interest, which is a very amorphous term that we'll talk about in greater detail tonight, which will help identify the connected communities that we want to keep together as we consider redrawing district lines. And last but not least, our goal for today is that community members leave empowered to give effective feedback. So by absorbing the content that we're going to be sharing tonight, by talking with your friends and neighbors, and really thinking everything over and providing feedback as the process continues as well, those are all great ways to participate and inform the process that will determine your district lines for the next 10 years. Next slide. And then next, let's address the question, why should you care? So fundamentally, democracy just works better when people are engaged. And being engaged means you're aware of the issues in your community and weighing in on important matters that factor into how your city is run. Second, there are things that you know best about your community. So you all know the community, and it's essential that those of us involved in the process hear from you. And lastly, this is a once in a decade opportunity since the census data is released once every 10 years. So every 10 years, communities get together and talk about demography, and this is a really exciting time for this community of Livermore to be working through this process. Okay, and then on this slide here, you can see the timeline for Livermore's redistricting process. So as you can see, we recently held the first public hearing on October 11th, which is available on drawlivermore.org with a video and the presentation materials if you missed it. And then looking ahead, the next public hearing will be on January 24th. And what's exciting about that is that here tonight, we'll be going over all of the tools that you can use to provide feedback, to draw proposed plans for district lines. And that time between now and January is time for the community to review all the materials and take advantage of this time to have your own proposed plans for districts and submit your feedback through the website drawlivermore.org. And then on the next slide, you can see a little bit more detail. Excuse me, one moment. There we go. A little bit more detail in terms of the timeline and how it's broken down into the phases. So here we are now. I apologize. So here we are now kind of in the beginning of the process. You can see that this first phase is before the ability to have draft maps shared. And then there's also the second phase when there will be at least 2 hearings after the drawing of draft plans. And so that really does provide a clear line where there is a lot of opportunity for community input and engagement and feedback that will then inform that later phase and make sure that there is ample time and opportunity to hear from the community before we get into that phase. And so with that, I will turn it over to Michael for this next slide as he gets into more of the process and rules for redistricting.
Great, thank you for that. And so what is redistricting? Well, fundamentally, it involves the fact that the city has recently changed its elections process, where before but you elected at large, which means that everybody voted for everybody. Now only the people in a district get to vote, but they only get to vote for their one city council person in that district. And that is done by districts. And districts have to change every 10 years. And why does that have to happen? Because populations shift over time. And redistricting is simply the act of redrawing those lines to reflect those changes. And as was noted before, it's an important process, but because it affects how people are represented. And if there's a core thing to take away from this, yes, there's lots of complexity. Yes, there's going to be lots of tools available, but fundamentally, it's a pretty simple thing we're trying to accomplish, which is to figure out who really should be going together for purposes of representation. So if we advance to the next slide. So why do you have to go through this process, and why might you need to change your lines? That doesn't mean you actually will have to, but why might you need to? First and foremost is that every 10 years in this country, we go through what we call the census, which is simply the act of trying to count every single person who lives in this country and figure out where they live. And that tells us whether districts are of equal size or if populations have changed. Second, rules do evolve over time. There have been some small changes since the city went through this process, even a few years ago. But a lot of those changes were pretty small compared to what they could have been. So a lot of the process is going to be very familiar to people who are involved and followed the earlier process. And then finally is public input. This is, as was noted, an opportunity for the residents of Livermore to say what's working and what isn't. And an opportunity to say either the lines are great here or there's a place where there needs to be a change. And so if we advance, so what do those demographics say? And even though the districting process was only a few years ago, the data we actually used for that was from the 2010 census. So we were looking at 10 years old data, but now we have data from 2020, and it shows there haven't been radical changes in the city's population, that the districts are still relatively even in size. And that means that those district boundaries don't necessarily have to change. That doesn't mean that the residents of the city can't say that certain things aren't working well and certain things aren't, but it does mean that those boundaries are a place you can start the conversation or not, depending on how you feel things are working. We advance to the next slide. This shows some of the demographic makeup of the city. You can obviously see some large populations of Latinos, Asians in the city, but none of those raised to the threshold that would trigger what's called the Federal Voting Rights Act, which is a very important part of the process in some jurisdictions, but won't necessarily deeply influence the Livermore process. And why that's important, we'll actually see on the next slide, which is that the first and foremost and the priority is that those districts be of equal population. Now, equal population does not mean exactly equal. Generally, it means, and this is a little bit of a shorthand, plus or minus 5%. So you kind of want each district to be within those ranges, which your existing boundaries are. So that is one thing you want to look at. And then that second criteria is federal law. That's where, again, that Federal Voting Rights Act is important, but again, probably not as applicable to Livermore's redistricting process. So what are the other criteria? What are the other things we're going to be looking at in this process? And these are listed in a rough rank of order under state law. Contiguous is a pretty easy concept. Every part of the district needs to be touching every other part of the district. So you can't connect the northeast corner of town to the southwest corner of town with nothing touching in between. Those would not be contiguous. Neighborhoods and communities of interest. This is really the place where the residents of Livermore can really contribute to this process. And in a moment, we'll talk about some of the tools to do that, because sometimes this can be complicated and it can be hard for people to approach, because people may not necessarily even know who their city council member is, let alone what district boundaries, and may not be invested in that conversation. But everybody knows where they live, and they know what they consider their community and what they consider their neighborhood. So this is an opportunity for people who maybe are not engaged in the redistricting process to still influence those lines by providing that simple information of, this is my community. And that's something that we do need to look at as part of this whole process. And it's a really critical part for the public, because there's no database of communities of interest in California. There's no database of every community in Livermore. This is really something where the public needs to tell your council where those communities are. Understandable boundaries is an understandable concept, that once these district boundaries are defined, somebody should be able to walk up to you on the street and tell you what they are, and you would know what they were talking about. We're going down Main Street and then taking a left on X, and then we're following the river, whatever that may be. That's the idea, is that you should be able to know where these district boundaries are and be able to tell somebody else. Compactness, I will note, is the last order priority, so it is less important than all the other ones. But this is the one that kind of everyone can understand, and that this is the look feel test, right? Do the districts look weird? Does it kind of make sense? Are they can you know, this is the place where the infamous gerrymander word most often comes up, is when you start seeing districts that are less than compact. Now, that doesn't mean every district needs to be a perfect square. There are lots of reasons for districts not to be perfect squares, because people don't live in perfect squares. And again, remember, this whole process is about people and making sure people are fairly represented. And you want to look at all those other criteria, and then you also want to make sure that those district boundaries are relatively compact, and you're not stretching out to skip over one group of population to get to the next. So those are the process, those are the rules of the game, as they say, that will govern what the council does. But before the council gets to that stage, you noticed on the calendar that was shown earlier, we have a long stretch before that second hearing. And that's not by mistake, that's on purpose. That is meant to allow the public time to start building that foundation of information that then can influence the later stages in the process. And with that, I will turn it back over to Trepepi Smith to talk about some of the baseline concepts, and then I'll join you again to show some of the fun toys we have for you.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Wagaman. And so to follow up on those criteria that we just covered, a few that are most critical when it comes to gathering that community feedback are neighborhoods and communities of interest. So first, we'll touch on neighborhoods. When we're talking about neighborhoods for the purposes of redistricting, we can think about these two questions listed on this slide. So what is your neighborhood, and what are its geographic boundaries? And some easy to think about boundaries for a neighborhood could be natural dividing lines, such as major roads, rivers, canals, or hills, areas around parks or schools, or other neighborhood landmarks. And so these might come up as you're just naturally thinking about, oh, my neighborhood is around this park, or between this highway and this road. So those are some elements to keep in mind. And if the demographer or the city doesn't receive public feedback about neighborhoods, then other sources of information could include things such as planning records and other documentation. So those are neighborhoods, pretty classic definition. And then next we'll move on to a concept that's beyond neighborhoods, and that is communities or communities of interest. And under the California Elections Code, community of interest does have a very specific definition in the context of districting and redistricting. So as you can see on this slide, a community of interest is a population that shares common social or economic interests that should be included within a single district for purposes of its effective and fair representation. And we do, of course, want to highlight that communities of interest do not include relationships with political parties, incumbents, or political candidates. So those are our official definitions. And then on the next slide, these are some things to think about when we're really trying to brainstorm and consider what Livermore's communities of interest are. And to do so, we'll break it down into a couple of questions here. So first, what defines your community? And this can be your geographic area, plus really any shared issue or characteristic. And to follow up on what Mr. Wagon mentioned, there really isn't a comprehensive list or even a list of the specific issues that would lead to a community of interest, because it really is just so dependent on the community and what your story is within your community. And then the second question is, would your community benefit from being included within a single district for purposes of its effective and fair representation? Or for your community, would you prefer or would you benefit more from having multiple representatives, so you'd like to be spread across and not combined all in one district? So these are questions that you might have immediate thoughts on tonight, or you might want to mull these over a little bit as you think about specific communities that may exist in Livermore and how they would best be represented at the local government level. So on the next slide, it will be your turn to help describe communities of interest. So here are a few of the questions to consider as we move forward. And we actually have an even more detailed list on the next slide to help us think through what defines communities of interest. So on that next slide, these questions can help guide you through thinking about your community of interest and how you would define it. So I'll go ahead and talk through these questions, and then I'll open it up to anyone who may wish to raise their hand tonight and share some initial feedback. And before I do that, I also want to mention that we're taking notes on the feedback shared tonight, and that will be shared with the demographer and incorporated into the redistricting process. So here we go. We'll jump into these questions and be thinking about them and ready to raise your hand. Who is a part of your community? What are some meaningful places your community recognizes or gathers at? What are some common concerns you share with a group? What are some common cultural characteristics that unite a community? What are common work-related traits that bring a community together? What is significant about the physical environment? And what areas benefit from staying together in a district? And before I open it up, I do just want to remind everyone, if you do need a bit more time to go through these, you're welcome to do that as well. And feel free to share your feedback through drawlivermore.org anytime. But with that, I'll ask folks to go ahead and raise their hands and we'll gather some community input. Okay, I'll ask for confirmation from my team, but I'm not seeing any raised hands at the moment. Okay, well, we'll give people a couple more seconds to think about if they would like to share any feedback tonight. And while we do that, I will just remind folks, we'll have a screenshot on our final slide this evening, but drawlivermore.org is the website that is established now for the city, specifically about redistricting. And there are many opportunities to engage on that website, not only through the mapping and map review tools that we'll cover tonight, but also through a contact tab and a subscribe tab where people can subscribe for additional information. So as folks absorb this information and think about any feedback they may want to share, that website is available 24/7 to be able to engage through that platform and share any feedback. So I don't believe I'm seeing any raised hands at this slide. We also have one more opportunity to get some questions and answers during the mapping demo. Oh, I do have one raised hand.
I wanted to make sure that I was waiting for anybody from the public, but I did have one clarifying question. I've been working on this at the county level a little bit, and really trying to think through how to think about one representative or two representatives. So in thinking about that, can you give some thoughts on, you said people might want to think about that. Help us all out here. How would you recommend thinking about that? What are some of the issues people might want to take up as they're thinking that through?
I can give a few examples just on some anecdotes that I've heard from past examples, and then Mr. Wagaman, by all means, feel free to chime in. But from other stories that I've heard, other jurisdictions, there might be a particular section of town, whether it is a beach area in a jurisdiction or a downtown district where it is an area that is of particular significance such that they think that it would make the most sense for that interest to be represented by as many people on council as possible. So those are a couple examples that I can think of right off the top of my head. Mr. Wagaman, do you have any other similar examples?
Sure. And state law, just to be clear, favors toward keeping a community of interest in a single district. So that's what it defaults towards, is an assumption that people who are in a community are going to want to be put together. Now, as highlighted, there might be a reason, for some reason, that isn't necessarily the case for a jurisdiction. The classic example, and I'm going to refer to this being very clear, I'm not talking about Livermore, just talking about hypothetical city A. But often this comes up as the classic example is a downtown, right? Where sometimes people have a downtown that's kind of developing its own nature, its own culture, that wants to really be kept whole into a single district. And in some jurisdictions, you have a downtown where it's really the place that everybody comes together, and having that all in one district would kind of separate it out from all the others. So that's the classic example that sometimes comes up. But again, the default position is towards trying to keep communities whole whenever possible. So if for some reason there is a community that we need to pay attention to, but maybe isn't one that people think should be kept in one district, that's really an important thing to emphasize, because otherwise the assumption will be those should be kept whole.
I have one more question, sort of following up on that. And I got distracted by trying to unmute, so hopefully I'll be able to remember the question. Are there any particular aspects of Livermore that you, and I'm guessing you cannot answer this question at this point, but any particular advice you'd want to share with people looking to, define their communities of interest? And I'm totally fine if you say, not going to go there, because that's, yeah.
I'm not going to go there, but I will say that one thing that is really important that I will go there is people sometimes have assumptions about their city that everybody knows everything about. This is the way, you have to divide things up in town. And remember, I'm not from Livermore. I don't live there. I try to come for all the meetings and be in person. I'm hoping we're all going to be in person soon enough. But things that you may just assume we all know, don't assume all your neighbors even necessarily know or necessarily agree on. So this is really that chance to spell those things out. And I always find it interesting when we go through these redistricting processes. Sometimes it's fun, it's obviously everyone wants to know what the lines end, but a lot of the times it's just an illuminating opportunity for everybody to talk about your city as a whole and to get to know each other better. So that would be the best advice I have.
Great. Well, thank you.
Great. I'm not seeing any other raised hands at the moment, so it looks like we can proceed, and then we will open it up for Q&A at least one more time. So with that, we can move on to the next slide. All right, so now is when we're getting into the discussion and demonstration of the public mapping and map review tools. And here in a moment, Mr. Wagaman will share his screen. And as you'll see, the city has made multiple different tools available for different purposes. So there are different tools for different levels of technical skills and interests to help ensure that everyone feels like they do have an opportunity to get involved and provide input and make their voices heard. And whichever of the tools you use, or if you simply just draw on a napkin, your input is welcome and can be valuable in this process. So next slide. On this side, we'll ask Michael to go ahead and share your screen, but actually this is a screenshot of drawlivermore.org, and you can see there the URL where these tools are housed.
And, as was just mentioned before I start sharing that screen and showing you the website and what lives on it, again, really do emphasize that these tools are meant for different purposes and different audiences and different opportunities to participate. So what is the right tool for one person and one event may not be the right tool for another. So this is really trying to give as many opportunities for people to engage as possible. So you might see one tool be like, well, that's dumb, I'm never going to use that. That's fine. But there might be a tool that really works for you. And this is really to make sure all of your neighbors have an opportunity to participate. So with that, I'm going to share my screen in theory here. And so you are now seeing again that website, right? Where now you can see this list of tools here that are available, and they are now all available on the website. The first here I'll highlight is this community of interest mapping tool. Communities of interest, again, this is the lowest barrier to participation. You're not trying to configure districts. You're not trying to meet legal criteria. You're just saying, here's the people who go together. And because that is a relatively simple task being asked of people, though sometimes, nobody thinks about their community until they're really asked to, like, what are the boundaries of my community? This is a pretty simple tool for people to use, which if you look at it, it's a simple one pager, front and back. And all you're really doing here is this is a map of Livermore, and you're going to take a pen and draw around your neighborhood. And no, I'm not biasing. I don't know if that's a neighborhood or not. I'm just theoretically. And you just drawing that shape, because communities of interest do have to be defined by boundaries, because ultimately we are drawing districts. So I have to have a polygon. So you're drawing that, and then you're describing that community, that question that was just talked about, like what makes it a community? Why is it important for it to be kept together? And that's all this task asks for. It's really a simple thing, nothing more, nothing less. Mail it, email it, take a screenshot and email it in, and that will allow that to be considered as part of the process. If we go back, the next tool over is called Districtor. This is a tool we'll actually look at twice, because it actually serves two functions. One is if you just want to draw that community of interest, but you don't want to use a piece of paper, you want to use something a little bit more sophisticated, and then it also can be used for drawing district boundaries. But we're going to start with just looking at the community of interest part of Districtor. And so when you enter that, clicked on that link, you would be brought over to this page. And you'll see two options. The purple one is to draw actual proposed districts. And this orange one is if you want to just draw a community of interest. So if we clicked on that orange one, it would bring us to this page. And you would see a map of the city of Livermore. And a lot of these tools are going to be very intuitive, right? The zoom out, we all know and love. The zoom in, we all know. But really what we're going to look at is this corner up here. And if we look in this corner, you can see there's this finger. All the finger does is lets you move around the map. Pretty simple and straightforward. The fun stuff happens once you click on the paint button, this little button there. And you see it brings up this interface. And what you can see now is it's starting to highlight different blocks, right? And these are the building blocks, these the census blocks that we use for redistricting. So all of these are the things that we get from the federal government that are the things that we need to use to draw these district boundaries. So if somebody asks, why is this shaped that way? It's because our friends in DC gave it to us. It's not from the city, it's from them. So that's what we have to work with. And if I were to click and hold, you'll see that starts filling in, right? Now I am drawing that community, and it is filling that in. Now let's say I wanted something smaller and a little bit more refined. If you make it, if I reduce this down, this brush size, now I'm only clicking one block at a time. If I get it bigger, now I'm covering a much larger swath at any one time. So you have that option of how big or how small you want to go. And if you make a mistake, don't worry, you would just click on this erase button. And now you can start taking stuff out, just the way you put stuff in. Pretty intuitive, pretty straightforward. It takes a little getting used to, I'll fully admit, but that's basically all you're doing. And then when you're done and you have your shape and you're happy with what you have, you're going to give it a name. And then this is your opportunity to give it a description too. Again, why is it important? What is it? Why is it important to be kept together? Now, if you wanted to, and this is completely optional, let's say your community of interest was really defined by some landmark. So your community of interest is defined by proximity to a school. Just making that up. You would be able to click this button and you could put a little dot on there and describe that point, that this is a community of interest that is built around this particular dot or multiple dots, whatever they may be. Once you are done and you're happy, and like, this is my community of interest, you can go over to this evaluation tab and you would be able to tell you how many people are in that community and what are the basic racial and ethnic demographics of that particular community that you've defined. And then when you're ready, you can go up and you would click this button up here where it says update. And then you have a couple of options. One of which, if you're done and you're ready to go, you would have this share now button that you have. You can give it a name and then you would share to gallery. At that point, that is you telling us you are ready, you are done with that community of interest. You would like it entered into the public record. If you've started the process and you're not quite done yet, and you want to kind of think about it a little bit more, you can click this work in progress and save it as a draft and come back to it. Now, I will tell you the way this tool is set up, both the drafts and the finalized are going to be public. So I'll show you in a second where those are published. But so people will be able to see those drafts. But the important thing is that they aren't considered official. They're not going to be part of the record until you go to that share now and share that to the gallery. The other thing really quickly before I click off of here is just to note this copy to clipboard. That's something you may want to do if you're planning on engaging in the process more. And you'll see the same option for the plans because that is a unique identifier for your community of interest selection. So if you wanted to submit additional information to the city council, or you wanted to talk about it during a public hearing after you've drawn your map, that 5-digit code or this name that you've given, either one, is an easy way for them to pull back up and look at that and be able to talk about that community of interest during the process. So that is our first visit to Districtor, and we'll come back to it in just a moment. But before we do, I'm going to go back here. And let's say you're more involved in this. You caught the redistricting bug and you don't just want to submit a community of interest. You actually want to draw a plan and you want to submit, say, these are the districts I'm going to propose. Again, we're trying to draw 4 districts of roughly equal size. And we have 3 different options to do that. The first is, again, a paper tool. And this is what you see here. This can be printed out. And all you would do there is you would take a pen. And these are ways that you can divide up the city called slices that were created by me that you can use to kind of easily divide up the city. Because those before, when we were looking at those in Districtor, you saw there are literally hundreds of census blocks that make up Livermore. And that can be a little daunting to people. And so this is a tool for people who don't necessarily want to deal with all that complexity, but do want to take a shot at drawing their own district boundaries, because this breaks up the city just into 50 slices. So much smaller number of things to keep track of. And all you would do is you would decide, I want the district boundary, let's say it'd be right there. You would take a pen, you would draw that boundary, you would divide, you can draw a single district, you could draw all 4, depending on how involved you are. Again, you would provide information about your district. And then most people I will tell that use this just end up taking out their camera phone, taking a picture of that piece of paper and then emailing it in. You would also have the option to mail it in or scan it and email it in. That's all you need to do. And at that point, that plan will be treated just as if it was a plan drawn by me. So every member of the public who submits a plan, your plans are going to be treated on par with all the others. So they'll all be available to your council for consideration. Now, I will tell you, using this, if you wanted to create districts, you do have to probably break out the calculator and start adding up each of these slices to figure out if they're roughly of equal size. And for those of us who are a little bit more math adverse, we do have an additional option, which I'm going to show everybody here. And I'm going to switch my screen sharing here. Maybe. There we go. And this is an Excel tool that's available on the website that can be downloaded. The advantage of this is, again, you can work on the computer, but you don't need to necessarily have an internet access. So if you're sitting on the beach and for some reason decide you really want to draw lines rather than enjoy the sun, this option is available to you. And all it does is it works on those same set of slices that we talked about before, those same divisions of the city. And I think there are 69 in Livermore. And all you would do is you go in and you decide, I want slice 1 to be in District 3. And I would like slice 2 to be in District 4 and slice 3 to be in District 4. And what you notice happening here is it's adding up the numbers there. So you don't have to worry about the calculator. This does it all for you. And you'll be able to go in and be able to assign all of those slices, all 69 of them, and be able to see the demographics, see if they're roughly of equal size. And then when you're done, all you do is you take that file, you email it in, and that's all you need to do, and you're done. Easy peasy. So that's another option that is available to everybody. And then the final option, again, we're going to go back to the commission web or the city website here, is again, there's the paper tool, there's the Excel tool, or again, you can go back to Districtor. And if we went to Districtor, instead of clicking on the orange button, we clicked on the purple button, which is the one to draw a plan. We would get another view of the city. You'll notice this view is just slightly different in that it's the grayscale. So if you're ever confused about which one you're on, if you've got the color background, you're looking at communities of interest. And if you got the gray background, then you're at draw your own district. And the draw your own district is a little different. It's got the same finger, so you can still move around. It's got the same brush, but you'll notice now that there are 4 different colors up here, and those represent 4 different districts. And what we're able to do now, instead of trying to draw a community of interest, you can start coloring in and drawing a district. And what you'll notice happening here is the lines increasing, and this is our target. That's that ideal number size. Don't have to be exact, doesn't have to be perfect. There's lots of reasons you may not want it to be perfect, but it does allow you to start filling that in. And no, I'm not drawing a proposed district. So if this is a dumb district, don't yell at me. I'm just coloring in. But now you can see this is basically pretty close to a district, right? And now I could go in and start coloring another district. And it gives you all sorts of little tools that you can fiddle with, like you can lock a district. So once you're done, you can say, I don't want that. Don't change any of my districts that I've already drawn so I don't get them screwed up. It allows you to highlight unassigned areas so you can see what are the parts that I still need to go back and fill in. All those little tools of things. It also has some options here where on those data layers, you can go in and you can click. And for example, if you wanted to see where is the Hispanic population concentrated in town, or where is the API community concentrated in, it'll allow you to see all those kind of basic demographics, again, of the city, whatever kind of information there you're looking for. And then again, once you're done, it'll show you those basic demographics for all of the districts you've drawn. And when you're done, you can go back to that save option, just like we did before. And again, you would either save it as a work in progress or say you're done and be able to send it in and share to gallery once you are completed with your plan. Really quickly before I show you where those go, the other option you do have available to you is if you hit the 3 lines, you would have the option if you wanted to start over. And particularly if you look at this print to PDF, this would be an opportunity if, let's say, you wanted to draw that plan and then you wanted to, again, attach it to your other testimony or attach it to additional material. You have the ability to export that out and keep that as a record for yourself, knowing that in addition to being a record for you and yourself, as soon as the plans are submitted through this tool, they're going to be available for you and your neighbors to see as well. Because nobody's done this yet, I'm not going to show you any in Livermore because there aren't any. So I'm just going to show you from another jurisdiction, and you can see here are those plans. You can see the ones that are a little bit more brightly colored. Those are districts. You can see this one that's blue. That's a community of interest. So you'll see all of those getting loaded up and people being able to see those. And those will be available and then eventually added to the public record for the future discussion of those district boundaries. So again, lots of different options available, whether you want a paper tool to draw your community of interest, you want to do that online, you want to draw a district plan either in paper, in Excel, or online. Lots of different ways for you to influence the process. The only other parts I will note for everybody here are these last two options, because sometimes you got to think through, how do you want to divide up the city? What are the options available to you? That's where these baseline maps and these interactive Google map matter. The baseline maps, these are lots of different ways to view the city, whether based on census geography, the distribution of racial ethnic groups in the city, land use rules, the NCS, which are to the vice mayor's question earlier, where one thing I got to learn about during the last redistricting the districting process. That was a unique thing. I didn't run into another city. So lots of different options of different ways to view the city. And then the interactive tool here is an opportunity to view the city, view the current district boundaries, really zoom in if you want to see exactly the streets that are involved in those current district boundaries. And also, if you are using either the paper tool or the Excel tool, which relies on the slices, it lets you put those on the screen and really zoom in so you can see exactly what is in a particular slice and be able to review those options and be like, okay, what exactly street is that following? So it gives you all those various options of ways to get to know the city. Those are available, again, if you're submitting a community of interest, if you're submitting a plan, or if you just want to use those to inform your own testimony when you decide to come to one of the hearings and or submit through the other tools that are available. So with that, I'm going to stop my sharing and return things back over to Tropepi.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mr. Wagaman. Those tools are really impressive and really intuitive, like you mentioned. So I'll just mention a few other things and then we'll open it up for additional questions and answers. If those tools seem like a lot to anyone, there's also just the opportunity to send an email and you can summarize your feedback in perhaps your thoughts on a community of interest, and we'll share that on the final slide, but that email address is redistricting@cityoflivermore.net. And then drawlivermore.org is where you can go and find links to those tools, and then just a general contact tab as well. So I know Mr. Wagaman shared a lot of it is really intuitive, but there's also a ton to dig into in terms of the data and the tools themselves. So yeah, I'm seeing some raised hands already. So I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor, for your question or feedback.
Okay, thank you. I think that's those are really great tools. The one question that just occurred to me, will they be available to us just sort of on a permanent basis? So that if anybody, I mean, there's a lot of interesting information there that I think anybody coming to the city might want to know.
Sure. So under the new state law, and this is a change, the redistricting process, this database of information you create is actually required to be kept on the city website for 10 years, so that if in 2026 somebody has a question about how did these district boundaries get created, that information will still be there for the public.
Question was, were the tools available for viewing it, not just the information, but do we have the user interface into it?
Yep. So all that stuff is going to live on your website and be part of that, again, that ongoing record for the decade.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Banana.
Yeah, thank you very much. Those tools are really impressive. Very, very interesting. I hope we can, get a lot of feedback from the community by using them. So I apologize if you've already answered this question somewhere. Is the demographic data that you were showing, is that based on 2020 census data, or is it the newest data we have on demographics?
Sure. So there's two sources of data that you'll see. And just so people know why are those particular data you all cited, it's actually in state law that there's certain data that you have to include and have to make available to the public as part of the redistricting process. And in that data, there's two sets of stuff. The first is the total population, and that is from the 2020 census. And so that is that door-to-door count of every single household trying to count every single person. And that is that most current data. When you see the racial ethnic data, that is by what's called citizen voting age population. So that is the closest we get to eligible voters here, that from data that comes from the census. And that's actually from what's called the American Community Survey. And the American Community Survey, as its name suggests, is a survey. So it is not counting every single person at one time like the census does. It's actually a monthly survey that is done and then averaged over 5 years. So the current data we're working on is the average of the data from 2015 to 2019. So that's where you see that racial and ethnic data. That's coming from the American Community Survey, but the population data is absolutely from the most recent 2020 census.
Okay. Do you have any idea what the uncertainty or the error bars on the more detailed data is? Just roughly, is it considered to be pretty good, and we can, kind of really get a feel for the different populations in different parts of the community by looking at that?
So it is pretty good because it is a very, very large sample. Now the accuracy increases the bigger the geography gets. So the data is more accurate for Livermore as a whole than when you get down to an individual census block because of that survey sample bias. I will tell you that, again, it is a 5-year rolling average. So if somebody says, hey, in the last 2 years, this corner of town has really changed and really become more diverse, there's really been an influx of X, the American Community Survey may not capture that, which is why, as has been emphasized throughout this presentation, the best source of information is actually none of these things. It's the members of the community themselves.
Yeah, I thank you for that. Yeah, and I actually think we have seen in some parts of our community pretty big changes in time frame of a couple of years as opposed to 5. So I have one more thought. I think that getting people to take advantage of these tools and really give us the input we're hoping to get, whether or not we make changes or not, I think we're going to learn something from the community by the answers we get. And just what people are thinking. It's a great source of communication with the community. So I hope we get as much feedback as possible. I'm wondering if it's possible. I know we're doing some communication through the website and social media on these tools and this whole process. But when I think about where people go in our community, all parts of our community tend to go to libraries. And I'm just wondering, is it possible to have an interface with a large screen TV in the lobby of the Civic Center Library, the lobby of the Rincon Library, other places where people go, the community center, where this is just live and people can actually start, kind of noodling around with it. And maybe they'll just get interested enough to go home and actually submit a plan. I'm just not sure we're going to reach enough people and we're going to get enough input. I mean, sadly, we've got one person on the public here tonight. I'm not sure what we expected, but I would really like to get this information back. We may or may not change the lines, but this is great information. I'd like to bring it to people where people are coming to. And I just wonder if we thought about that and there's some way to make this an interactive thing in places where people are going in our community.
Yeah, I can address that a little bit. So we have had that idea a little bit actually already in talking about having a flyer out there accompanying the paper tools. And so I love the idea of having the paper tool and the flyer out at libraries. And on top of that, like you mentioned, why not have a large screen with it up in an interactive format as well? So I think to your point, having it at libraries, the community center, we've already had contact with a couple of community groups that I think will help distribute the flyers to their groups as well. And just a note too, that this workshop is being recorded and will be posted on the website. So it can live as a resource that people can refer back to and watch between now and January as well. So we'll get that engagement.
Okay, I just really encourage us to try to think of creative ways to bring it to where people are and somehow draw them into actually using the tools. Definitely. Thank you for that. Really great presentation. I appreciate all the work that's gone into it. Thanks.
And council member, really quickly, I would just add that the line you use, which I really like, is bring it to where people are. That's not just talking about physically where there are, but it's also bring it to where their level of engagement is. And again, a lot of the times where I see jurisdictions make a mistake is they make it all about submitting district plans. How many district plans can we submit? And that is important information and absolutely will inform this immediate part, but it isn't necessarily the stuff that'll inform the long-term knowledge of the city. So really a lot of people aren't going to want to do that. And Where cities sometimes make a mistake is not emphasizing just that simple community of interest part of stuff, because that's where a lot of people are in your city. Is they may not care about how the city council is elected, but they do care about their particular neighborhood and making sure it's protected.
So I have a follow-up question to what Councilmember Bonanno just was getting at, is on the demographic data. So did I hear you say that it's not coming from the 2020 census? Because the census has the demographic data. Why aren't you using the census data?
So the short answer is that the census does not ask about citizenship. So it does not, in fact, produce data on citizen voting age population. And that citizen voting age population data is what the US Supreme Court has ruled is necessary to use for purposes of Federal Voting Rights Act compliance.
So I get that, but here's the concern. And the reason is that we're worried about vaccine uptake. And we found that from the 10-year extrapolation and continuous thing of what our demographics are versus what the census says, that there's a difference of 5,000 whites that apparently have been, that are now, even though the population was within 1,000 between the previous numbers and the new census, the number of whites, according to this latest census, has dropped by 5,000. And the number of Asians has increased by 5,000. So this is a significant difference in the data. So my question is it possible to see if this voting age information that you have is at least consistent with the 2020 census information that we have by demographic? I mean, because yeah.
Sorry. So two things, and this is all based on council feedback, and particularly when we get to that hearing too, that I'll make the note now. You know, when we start talking about proposed district plans, if you want that additional census data on racial ethnic data, that will be by population and voting age population. It won't be the citizen voting age population. We can absolutely include that. So when you look at plans, you're able to see those differences, well, I think and see if there's anything going on.
Just if we could, just because we saw a significant difference in the numbers, and so that begins to question what are we doing, that if you could at least check for consistency amongst the different sources. Where is it? Because right now, we're not sure what to believe. Except that we know that the census data for our total population and things is what we have to anchor on. But then this other federal law puts some disconnect in here. So let's at least look for consistency, that it makes sense. I think that would be, is that, Councilmember Bonanno, a further elucidation that was helpful?
Yes, I agree completely. I mean, I think there's some consistency checks we can do to see that the ratios are consistent, or some way to make sure that we're, those tools are giving people data that they're going to be providing input, and if that data is driving them to provide input, it's reasonably reflects our current composition of our population. So yes, agree 100%.
And one thing that I think would also be helpful for comparison, you have the chart that shows, according to the 2020 census, the populations that we now have in the districts that we went through. Could you show the difference between the data we used a couple of years ago and that data? Because there may be a little tuning around the edges that people might want to look at. And so the question is, have the gaps or the differences from the average of the districts grown? And why did we do what we did at the margin the last time? So if you could have a chart that compares what the numbers were, the population numbers were for the districts we chose 2 years ago compared to what it is now, that could be also helpful.
Sure, I'm happy to add that as both of those requests and make sure we can fulfill both those.
Okay, thank you. And so Councilmember Kick.
You may have answered this already and I may have missed it, but can you clarify who can draw these maps? Is it any age? Like, could this go to every high school civics class? And could every high schooler potentially draw their community of interest and create a map?
Yes, there's no limitations on the amount of who uses the tool. Again, my only suggestion, and it's just a suggestion, is your city is you want to focus on gathering information, not for the sake of gathering information, but information that's going to inform the process and ultimately result in good boundaries that everyone is comfortable with for the next 10 years. But absolutely, I worked with a jurisdiction during a district conversion where one of the final maps they considered was drawn by, I think it was a junior college student, but so not a high school, but it was a junior college student. So absolutely.
Thank you.
Councilmember Carling.
Yeah, I wanted to echo the mayor's point. And just off the top of your head, Mr. Wagaman, do you remember what our total population was that we used the last time we did this in 2018?
I don't know it off the top of my head, but I looked it up while the mayor was asking me the question. So the population that was used during the during the district conversion, which was from the 2010 census, was 81,560. And then to the question of what was the difference between those districts, it was 6.7%. So it means that the city's grown by approximately, what would that be? About 6,000 people. And then that total deviation has gone up by about 1.5%. So relatively close to where those existing boundaries were, just relatively small changes and relatively small growth, certainly compared to some of the some other communities in the East Bay that have been growing like a weed.
Right.
Thank you, but I think if we could get the numbers from each of the districts, just again, to the mayor's point, we may want to noodle around the edges on some of these. Thank you.
Yeah, Vice Mayor Monroe.
Yeah, so I want to turn back to the gathering information from our community and just speak to my own experience. You know, again, I'm doing this at the county level where the deadline is much sooner, and just how very difficult it is to get people engaged. My observation has been that it has to be in person, particularly for people who are the least engaged, that going into the communities, you know, so languages matter, obviously, but it's not just having I really appreciate having the ability, you know, to having materials in Spanish as well as in English, but that's not going to be enough, quite frankly. I know that we have areas of our community where people feel like they've been neglected and they're a little bit harder to gather in. You know, anybody can come to this kind of a meeting, although I did get a text from someone saying they couldn't get in. Can we get some help? So that might be one reason we have small numbers right now. I'm very concerned that we actually, you know, have a strong push to get numbers, you know, data from the people that we have not, who are just hard to reach. And I recognize that is time consuming and costs money. But I can tell, you know, I mean, look, I go and I do tabling all the time, and I can tell you that if you're behind the table, you get nobody. And if you stand in the middle of the sidewalk and you stop people and you tell them what's going on, you know, so using that as an analogy, that's what I'm hoping that we see going forward.
Perfect. Thanks, Vice Mayor Monroe. And that's what we're here for. So we will take your guidance and we will execute and go where the people are. So thank you. And I'm seeing some folks hop in and out. So it looks like people are able to join. But if there's anyone new who's joining as attendees, now's the time for questions and answers. So any additional raised hands out there?
I don't see anything at the moment.
Okay.
So is this, are we wrapping at this point then, if there are no further questions?
We have about 2 more slides where I'll just
Oh,
do some
okay.
closing comments and next steps. So I'll turn it back over to sharing of slides by my colleague Gerald, if we can pull up slide 23 exactly. So I do want to thank everyone for the dialogue tonight. I know we'll have this meeting recorded and able to share with the public. And we also got some really good discussion and feedback from our council members. So thank you. And as we wrap up, I'll just revisit the schedule for this process so we can discuss some of the next steps. And the next step really is to have this opportunity for the public to provide feedback and submit maps. Between now and January 31st is the due date for maps. And with that, January 24th will be the next hearing. And then the 3rd on February 14th and the 4th, as you can see, on March 14th. So that's our high level schedule. And then moving on to our final slide tonight. On the next slide, yep. I just want to thank everyone for participating in tonight's workshop. And as we move forward, the more public participation Livermore has, the more successful this process will be. So we will continue to work hard on the public engagement and feedback part. And for people who are watching this even in the future, please do share this with your friends and neighbors to share how important it is that we hear from all members of the community. So as we mentioned, this video will be posted on drawlivermore.org, actually on the schedule page. So with the event information for this meeting, you'll be able to click right on a video and watch it. And you can also always provide feedback by going to the contact tab on drawlivermore.org. So thanks again for joining us to learn how you can shape the future of Livermore. And this concludes the workshop. So I'll turn it back over
Well,
to the city.
not quite.
We have
a member of the public who wishes to ask a question.
Perfect.
Mr. Wente, City Clerk, can you let him comment?
Absolutely.
And have to be unmuted, and then you're good to go.
Sorry, I punched it once, came back up. Am I coming through?
You are.
Carl Wente here. Thank you all for what you do. Council members who serve and the staff, the collection of people that make up good government. Though there weren't a lot of public comments, those that know, you all know how important this is. A once a decade opportunity to shape our precious democracy. So I implore you all, which I believe that you will, to get super creative with outreach and use this opportunity to teach how data could flow in such a setting, to teach how communities are made, districts are made, precincts are made, all of it, right? That what is good government of the people, for the people, by the people. So get creative, reach out, get into the schools, waste no opportunity on teaching the civics lessons. I think it was Councilmember Trish. Get with Quest Science Center and look at how you can utilize the data that's coming through, because fundamentally that's what PlaceWorks is doing. That's what the council is reviewing. But people, get involved. This is critical. No one else was here, so I'm doing my darndest to speak for those that do care deeply about this. Thank you all for what you do.
Okay, well, thank you. And just knowing you and you have a bus, I just happened to think maybe we should buy some ads on the wheels. So I see Vice Mayor Monroe wants to say something.
I just wanted to make sure that Mr. Wente knew that it was actually Councilmember Kick that made the comment about the schools. But I also had a few things to say on the subject, and I very much, I really appreciate that that passionate speech. I very strongly agree.
Okay, well, it's always a pleasure to have Mr. Wente with us. So at this point, I don't see any other comments. I want to thank you for the good information. Looking forward to more steps in the process here. And I think we're ready to adjourn to a regular city council meeting on October 25th, 2021 at 7 p.m. again, held virtually via Zoom. So thank you all. Good night.